The last handful of dirt hit my son's casket when my phone buzzed. A trembling voice said, "Mom, I'm Daniel's boss. I found something. If you don't see it now, you might lose everything." I had just lost a son. How could a 61-year-old mother imagine her other child was the real nightmare? I did not know that the funeral I just attended might be the biggest lie of my life. My name is Eleanor Marsh. I am 61 years old, a widow, and I spent most of my life as a court clerk in a small Colorado town. Today, I am standing by a hole in the ground, watching clumps of frozen earth cover the casket of my eldest son. Daniel? The snow is thin, a pale dusting over the brown grass. Daniel. He was only 39, a risk analyst at a large financial firm, Helix Quant Metrics. My mind keeps flipping through images of him, trying to make this real. He was my serious child, the one who lived by rules and schedules, the one who always protected me, and who always tried to protect his younger brother. The funeral itself was a suffocating blur. The scent of the lilies was overpowering, acrid rather than sweet, catching in the back of my throat. I listened to the metallic scrape of the shovels, the dull thud as the first clods of dirt hit the polished wood. People I have known for decades moved toward me, their arms outstretched for hollow embraces. Their condolences were muffled, indistinct. I felt as though I was moving through a room thick with smoke, every sound distorted, every face slightly out of focus. My younger son, Luke, stood beside me. He is 35 and owns a home renovation company, Frontline Renovations. His wife, Vanessa, was attached to his arm, her expression a mask of perfect sorrow. She was dressed exquisitely, perhaps too exquisitely for the occasion, her black dress tailored in a way that spoke of money. She kept rubbing my back, a gesture that should have been comforting but felt rehearsed. Luke had handled all the arrangements. He was ruthlessly efficient. He signed the checks. He dealt with the funeral director. He selected the casket. "Don't worry about a thing. Mom," he said repeatedly, his voice smooth and steady. But as I watched him, I saw no raw edges of grief. He was too calm, too quick. He moved with the precision of someone managing a difficult project, not a man who had just lost his brother. Back at my house for the wake, the air was heavy with the smell of baked ham and quiet conversation. Luke skillfully separated me from a neighbor, his hand firm on my elbow, guiding me toward the den. "Mom," he started, his voice a low, gentle murmur. "We need to talk about the future." He gestured vaguely at the room. "This house," he said. "This 3-story house it's just too much for you now. The upkeep, the expense." He then began to speak of a high-end assisted living facility, one that was, conveniently, very close to his and Vanessa's new subdivision. The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. We had put Daniel in the ground only hours ago. I looked past Luke and saw Vanessa, hovering just inside the doorway, listening intently. Her eyes were not grieving. They were sharp, calculating. She immediately chimed in. "It's about your safety. Eleanor, the medical care, the services. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." I was too stunned to form a response. As I fumbled for words, the landline on the hall table rang, its shrill sound cutting through the quiet. Luke lunged for it, grabbing the receiver before it could ring a second time. He turned his back to me, walking into the kitchen corner, his voice a low, urgent whisper. When he returned, his face was tight, strained, but he refused to meet my eyes. Just some paperwork, he said, brushing it off. From Daniel's company. They'll call back later. Don't you worry about it. Mum? That night, sleep was an impossibility. I gave up on my cold, empty bed and lay on the sofa in the living room, the silence of the large house pressing down on me. Just as my eyes finally began to drift closed, my cell phone vibrated on the coffee table. An unknown number. I answered, my voice thick. Hello? A man's voice, cautious and low. Mrs. Marsh. My name is Graham Porter. I'm a director at Helix Quant Metrics. I was Daniel's boss. He paused, and I heard him take a shaky breath. Ma'am, I've just discovered something. Something related to Daniel. Something that could cost you not just your home, but, Mrs. Marsh, it could cost you your freedom. I sat bolt upright, the cold dread from the cemetery flooding back. I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning, he said, his voice urgent. And Mrs. Marsh, you must not, under any circumstances, tell Luke or Vanessa you are coming. The next morning, I woke up with a chilling purpose. When Luke came downstairs, I told him I needed to go to the pharmacy to pick up a refill. He immediately offered to drive, his solicitous behavior now feeling suffocating. No, I said, my voice sharper than intended. I just need some air. I grabbed my old coat, ignoring his puzzled look, and walked past him. I drove my old sedan, the one Daniel always wanted me to replace, into the heart of downtown Denver. The Helix Quant Metrics building was a towering statement of steel and glass, a place I had only ever seen pictured on Daniel's Employee of the Month certificate. The lobby was vast and cold, echoing with the clicks of expensive shoes on marble. I felt ancient and out of place in my sensible coat and scuffed boots. A bank of mirrored elevators swallowed me, lifting me silently, floor after floor. Young men and women in sharp, tailored clothes glanced at me, their faces polite, before looking away. They saw a grieving older woman. I felt a sudden, hot flash of anger. This was Daniel's world, this sterile, high-altitude place, and I had never truly understood it. Graham Porter met me at the elevator bank on the executive floor. He was a man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the most tired, deeply sincere eyes I had ever seen. Mrs. Marsh, thank you for coming, he said quietly. He led me into a corner office that seemed to float above the city. The walls were glass, looking out over the mountains. With a press of a button, the glass walls turned an opaque, milky white, sealing us in. He tapped another switch, and a small red light on a camera in the corner went dark. The silence was sudden and absolute, making the room feel like both a sanctuary and a trap. Mrs. Marsh, he began. My deepest condolences. Daniel was... he was exceptional. He did not linger on the pleasantries. He came to me 3 months ago. He had found something. He believed you were being defrauded, Mrs. Marsh, and that you were in danger of losing everything you have. He slid a heavy, black binder across the polished table. I opened it. My hands began to tremble. Inside were copies of bank statements from an account I had never opened, but which bore my name. There was a contract for a home equity line of credit, drawing funds against my house, which I had paid off a decade ago. And then, the worst part, a draft of a petition for guardianship, naming me incompetent, with a copy of my signature at the bottom. It looked so real, so jarringly perfect, that for one terrifying second, I wondered if I had signed it, if my mind truly was going. Daniel stumbled onto an encrypted file in our system. Graham explained, his voice low. It was related to a corporate client, Frontline Renovations, Luke's company. He found a steady stream of transfers, siphoning money from your accounts into theirs. My throat was too dry to speak. He continued. Daniel started digging. He didn't trust anyone, not even local law enforcement at first. He found emails between Luke and a neurologist, a Dr. Lowell Carver, discussing how to build a case file for your cognitive decline. They were actively creating a medical record, Mrs. Marsh, to have you declared legally unfit, to give Luke full control of your assets. No, I whispered. It was a reflex. Luke wouldn't. It's a misunderstanding. He's my son. Graham's tired eyes filled with profound sadness. I was afraid you would say that. He reached for a small digital recorder on his desk. Daniel recorded several phone calls. He was desperate for proof. He pressed play. I heard Luke's voice. It was not the voice of my grieving son. It was light, casual, and cold. He was laughing. She has no idea, he said to someone. She signs whatever I put in front of her, after all these years. It's time for Mom's money to work for us. My hand flew to my stomach, feeling as if I had been punched. The air left my lungs. The binder, the emails, they were abstract. But this sound, this betrayal, this was real. Graham leaned forward, his face etched with a gravity that terrified me. He lowered his voice, forcing me to look at him. Mrs. Marsh, Eleanor, I have to ask you the hardest question of your life. He paused. Are you absolutely certain the man you buried yesterday was Daniel? Before I could even process the words, before I could scream at him for such a monstrous suggestion, he pressed a button on his desk intercom. The door to a small, private, adjoining lounge hissed open. A man stepped out, leaning heavily against the doorframe. He was thinner than I remembered, his eyes haunted and dark. But he was alive. He was made of bone and flesh. He looked at me, his hands shaking. Mom, Daniel whispered, and my world, which had already cracked, shattered into a million pieces. I turned. The world tilted, my balance disappearing. Leaning against the doorframe, looking like a ghost hollowed out by sickness, was Daniel. He was alive. He was thinner, much thinner. The skin drawn tight over his cheekbones, and his eyes were dark pits of exhaustion. But he was undeniably, impossibly breathing. All the sound in the room, the distant city traffic, the hum of the office was sucked into a vacuum. There was only the frantic, slamming percussion of my heart in my ears. I must have stumbled, because I was suddenly across the room. My hands flew up, touching his face, his shoulder, his arm. He was warm. He was solid. How? The word tore from my throat, a ragged scream. How could you? I buried you. I stood there and I watched them. I buried you. I hit his chest, my fists pounding weakly, a desperate, frantic rhythm of grief and rage. Daniel did not flinch. He just pulled me in, his arms wrapping around me in a grip so tight it ached, burying his face in my hair. He was shaking as much as I was. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. God, I'm so sorry. I didn't have a choice. It was the only way I could find to save you. From Luke. He eased me into a chair, his hands still gripping mine as he knelt in front of me. After I found the bank transfers, I started collecting everything. The fake loan documents, the accounts Luke opened in your name. But I must have tipped him off. Strange things, accidents, started happening. His eyes met mine, filled with a fear I had never seen in him. My brakes were cut. Mum. Just enough to be spongy, to scare me. My apartment lock was jimmied open. I had this constant, gnawing feeling that someone had been inside. Just looking. Graham spoke, his voice grave. When Daniel brought the files to me, I recognized the pattern. The shell companies Luke was filtering your money through. He's in debt. Eleanor. Deep debt to loan sharks. These aren't just local thugs. They're connected to money laundering operations Helix Quant has been investigating for 2 years. If Daniel had just gone to the police, if he had filed a lawsuit, these people wouldn't have just silenced him. They would have cleaned up the entire situation. That means you, too. The air in my lungs turned to ice. So? Graham continued. We had to take Daniel off the board. We needed time to build a federal case and protect you. I contacted an old friend of yours from your court clerk days, Nora Camden. Nora, a razor-sharp lawyer I had worked with, now long retired. She's not as retired as she lets on, Graham said with a grim smile. She secretly consults for a federal task force on complex financial crimes. She and we devised this. We had to make Daniel disappear. We had to make him dead. It was horrible, Mom. Daniel broke in, his voice low. We used an unclaimed body from the city morgue, a man with a similar build, no family, a contact. A contact at the coroner's office, switched the paperwork. Helix Quant quietly paid for all the funeral expenses. It made the story of a sudden, tragic event look real. They moved me to a safe house in Utah the night before I watched you at the cemetery. My mind was a whirlwind. I was furious, violated by the deception, the pain of that burial. The most profound agony of my life was a lie. But as the rage boiled, another set of memories surfaced, clicking into place with sickening precision. Vanessa, always at my side with a cup of calming tea at night. Luke, handing me routine bank forms to sign, his hand covering the text. My recent forgetfulness, my confusion. It all fit. I knew you wouldn't believe it, Daniel said. He pulled out his own phone. I managed to get a small camera into the house last month. It's in the old bookshelf in the living room. He pressed play. I watched my own living room. I watched Luke, my youngest son, carefully spooning a fine white powder into the kettle I used for my evening tea. I watched Vanessa, standing on my front porch, whispering angrily to a large man I did not recognize. The next transfer has to be on time, or he'll... And then I watched the two of them, sitting at my kitchen table late at night, a stack of paper between them, practicing my signature, again and again. The room was utterly silent. The shock had burned away, leaving something hard and cold in its place. Graham and Daniel were watching me, their faces tense. Eleanor, Graham said softly, we need to stop them. The only way to catch the people above Luke is to let him think his plan is working. We need you to go back home. Mom, Daniel pleaded, we need you to help us get the last pieces. I sat there for a long, silent minute. I looked at the video of my signature being forged. I thought of the acrid smell of the lilies. I thought of Luke's calm, efficient face as he directed the pallbearers. I looked up, first at Graham, then at my living son. My voice, when it finally came, did not tremble. It was flat. It was frozen. Not just evidence. I stood up, the fog of grief replaced by a terrible, clear burning resolution. I want them to pay. I walked back into my house, the genuine pallor from seeing my son alive serving as a perfect mask. Luke was waiting in the foyer, his face tight with an anxiety that was not grief. "Mom? Where the hell were you? I was about to call the police." I let my shoulders slump, forcing my eyes to look watery and unfocused, mimicking the drugged state he had forced on me for weeks. I went for a walk," I murmured, leaning heavily on the doorframe. I used the script Daniel and Graham had fed me. I think I got turned around. I forgot the way back. Just for a minute. I watched the tension drain from Luke's face, replaced by something else, a sickening, private flash of satisfied pity. This was the proof he needed. I was the confused, grieving, vulnerable widow, exactly as he required. He was so much more comfortable with his plan now. That evening, Vanessa appeared at my elbow, a glass of water and the small white pill in her hand. "This will help you rest. Eleanor," she said, her voice like smooth, cold syrup. I took the pill, put it in my mouth, and took a large sip of water, swallowing clumsily as I held the pill under my tongue. I turned away, pretending to cough into a handkerchief, and spat the dissolving, bitter pill into the cloth. Later, in the privacy of my bathroom, I flushed the chalky residue down the sink and swallowed the identical capsule Daniel had supplied a simple vitamin. That night, I did not sleep the heavy, suffocating sleep I had endured for months. I lay in the dark, my mind clicking and whirring, sharp and clear for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The fog was gone, and I could finally think. I began my performance the next day. I became the woman they were trying to create. I left my keys in the refrigerator. I stood in the middle of the hallway, asking Vanessa what day it was, twice. I misplaced my glasses while they were sitting squarely on my head. It was humiliating, and it was empowering. I watched them exchange knowing glances over my head, their confidence growing, and their carelessness along with it. They spoke more freely around me, believing I was no longer processing the world. That afternoon, while they were out finalizing arrangements, I retrieved the tiny digital audio recorder Nora Camden had arranged to be delivered. I slipped it behind the thick cardboard backing of the heavy silver frame on the mantelpiece, a photograph of a happy, long-dead family, with Daniel and Luke as smiling boys. That night, after I had taken my pill and retired to my room, I listened. Their voices, filtered through the tiny speaker, filled my cold room. They talked about deadlines. The guy in New Mexico needs the first payment by the 30th. Luke's voice, tight with stress. "He's not waiting. Van, he said if he doesn't get it, he'll teach us a lesson we won't forget." My role as a forgetful old woman gave me new access. A few days later, I wandered aimlessly into the kitchen while Vanessa was on the phone, her back to me. Her voice was low and irritated. "The medical file is perfect. It's all there. All the cognitive decline markers. We just need Dr. Carver to sign off on the final assessment." She spun around, saw me, and abruptly hung up. "Oh, Eleanor, you startled me. Are you feeling all right? You look so pale." I just stared at her vaguely, as if trying to remember her name, and then shuffled away. Later, I locked myself in the guest bathroom, pulled the cheap burner phone Daniel had hidden in my closet from my robe pocket, and called Nora Camden. "They're moving faster," I whispered. They mentioned a Dr. Carver. Nora's voice was calm and steady. "Good. We know Carver. Now, Eleanor, I need you to find the paperwork. He'll have a file. He'll be sloppy. He'll have it in the house." I found it that night, in his unlocked desk drawer in the den, hidden beneath a stack of unpaid bills for his company. A neat folder containing the draft contract for the sale of my house. A blank power of attorney form, just waiting for a signature they were practicing so diligently. And a stack of statements for loans I never took out. I photographed every single page with the burner phone, tucked at the bottom of the stack. I found something else. Something that made my blood run colder than the grave I had visited. It was a life insurance policy, a massive 7-figure policy. And it was on Daniel. The beneficiary, in clear black type, was Luke Marsh. It was dated only 3 months before Daniel's death. My breath caught. The plan had not just been to steal from me by declaring me incompetent. The original plan had been much simpler. He was going to profit from his brother's death. Whether that death was planned or just a lucky break, the intent was the same. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in my armchair, the house silent. I looked at the 2 small, silver-framed photos on my nightstand. Daniel and Luke, aged 5 and 3, sandy-haired and smiling at a picnic, their arms slung around each other. I picked up the frame. I stared at the face of my youngest son, the boy who used to fall asleep in my lap. Then, I spoke to the empty, dark room. "If one of you wanted to make me a pawn," I whispered, my voice raw, "I will make you a lesson." It was no longer about self-defense. It was about justice. My justice. Nora and Graham moved fast. They called our plan the Widow's Gambit. While I played the part of the declining matriarch, they, along with a quiet federal task force, began the intricate process of moving my assets. Every painting, every stock, every dollar in my name was being systematically transferred into an ironclad, anonymous trust. One Luke could never touch. All I had to do was keep him distracted, keep him believing the prize was still on the table. So, I gave him the performance he was waiting for. One morning, I sat Luke down at the kitchen table, my hands trembling just so. "Luke," I began, my voice a frail whisper. "I've been thinking. Maybe you're right. This house is too much. I'm just so tired." A wave of such profound relief washed over his face that it was almost comical. He was trying to look concerned, but his eyes were bright with greed. "Oh, Mom," he said, taking my hands. "You're doing the right thing. I promise." Vanessa immediately sprang into action, her laptop open within minutes, scrolling through websites. "We'll find you the best place. Eleanor," she chirped. I watched her, noting how her search filters always sorted by most affordable. They didn't want the best. They wanted the cheapest. Every dollar saved on my care was another dollar for their creditors in New Mexico. While Luke was busy explaining his investment strategy for the proceeds of the house sale, I nodded along, my eyes vacant. I let him discover my main checking and savings. I let him feel smart. But I pretended to have forgotten a small, local credit union account, an account Nora had instructed me to keep active. This would be the bait. The moment he tried to move money into it, or out of it, her team would be able to trace its final destination. I amplified my performance. I had a phone call with my old friend Marge in reality. It was Nora Camden on her own burner phone. I sat in the living room, in full earshot of Luke and Vanessa, talking loudly. No. Marge. Daniel's funeral. It was on Tuesday, I think. Or was it Wednesday? And Luke's wife, what's her name? Veronica. No, that's not right. I watched them from the corner of my eye, smirking at each other. My confusion was their confirmation, and I knew the tape recorder behind the family photo was capturing it all, creating their proof for the competency hearing. The day before my appointment with Dr. Carver, Graham met me at a coffee shop. He slid a heavy, expensive-looking fountain pen across the table. "It's a camera," he said, his voice low. "The lens is here. Just press the top to start. It will record for 2 hours. Keep it in your pocket. Point it at him. When you're done, put it in the hallway with Luke." I went to the clinic with Luke, the pen heavy in my coat pocket. Dr. Lowell Carver was a man who looked like his suit. He was slick, dismissive, and radiated a smug, false authority. He ran me through a series of memory tests, his tone condescending. I played my part to perfection. What was the date I was off by a week? Who was the president I couldn't quite remember his name. But I remembered the name of the rose bushes in my garden crimson glory and the exact date of my wedding anniversary from 40 years ago. I gave him the perfect, textbook profile of moderate cognitive decline, just as I knew they wanted. After the assessment, he patted my hand. "You just wait here, Mrs. Marsh. I need to have a quick word with your son." As I left the room, I fumbled. "Oh, dear. My pen." I left the pen on the edge of his desk, its tiny lens pointed directly at the door and the hallway beyond. I waited in the exam room, the door slightly ajar. I heard Luke's voice, low and urgent. "Is it enough? Is that what you need?" "The report will be definitive." Carver's voice, smooth and confident. "It will be more than enough for any judge to grant the petition. She won't be able to sign a check for her own groceries, let alone manage an estate." Then, the sound I was waiting for, the rustle of an envelope. "This is for your trouble," Luke said. "This," Carver replied, "is for the final report." I collected my pen and let Luke drive me home, his mood visibly lighter, as if he'd just closed a major deal. That night, I made my next move. I told Luke that, with my mind so fuzzy. I wanted to do one last thing before I forgot the place. I wanted to host a small dinner party. Just to say goodbye to the old house, I said wistfully. Just a few old friends. A proper farewell. Luke and Vanessa loved the idea. It was the perfect, sentimental capstone to their narrative of a loving son helping his dotty mother transition. "Of course, Mom," Luke said, patting my shoulder. "Whatever you want." The stage was set. While I planned the menu, Nora Camden and I had one last meeting. We sat in her quiet, book-lined office and drafted my new final will. All assets, every last cent recovered, would go into the trust, which would, upon my death, be converted into a legal aid scholarship fund for low-income students. Daniel was named as a non-compensated advisor to the fund. For Luke, I specified a different inheritance. Nora typed it in, her face impassive. And to my son, Luke Marsh, I leave the sum of $1 symbolic for lessons learned too late. It was a cold, clean cut, the final piece of the trap. I was pretending to search for my reading glasses in the den when I heard Luke's voice from the kitchen, stripped of its usual smooth veneer and vibrating with raw panic. "I told you I'd have it. I just need more time." He was listening, his body rigid. I crept closer, hiding in the shadow of the hallway. I could hear the faint, angry squawk of a man's voice on the other end, but only caught the final words, a Cold, C-O-L-D, southern drawl. "End of the week. Luke. That's the deadline. After that, your old lady's house won't be enough to save your head." The line clicked. Luke slammed the phone down, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The next morning, the house was electric with his desperation. He had changed the plan. I heard him yelling at Vanessa in their room. "We're not waiting for some damn dinner party I'm calling Carver. I want that report on a judge's desk today." My burner phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Nora, routed through Graham. "Luke just filed an emergency petition for guardianship. He's pushing Carver's report, claiming you're in immediate danger to yourself." A second text arrived. "The asset transfer isn't complete. If a judge signs that order, he can freeze everything. We have 48 hours. Eleanor, we have to stall the court." I knew what I had to do. Nora's next text was an order: "You need to make a dangerous mistake. Publicly." I waited until Luke and Vanessa were focused on their laptops, dialing their lawyers, their faces grim. I grabbed my coat and my car keys. I walked straight out the front door, got into my sedan, and drove. I drove onto the interstate, merging clumsily, until I was miles from home. I pulled onto the shoulder, my heart hammering, and I dialed 911. "Hello." I pitched my voice high and thin, filling it with terror. I'm lost. I don't know where I am. I'm supposed to be home. My son. He keeps making me sign papers. Papers I don't understand." A patrol car found me 10 minutes later. The officer was young, his face full of concern. I repeated my story. "My son, Luke. He's a good boy, but he's so stressed. Ever since my other son, Daniel, passed, he just keeps bringing papers. He wants the house." The officer wrote down every word, his face hardening as he noted the coercion and my confused state. Nora's team had already been alerted, and they flagged his report. We now had an official, external record of Luke's pressure. Luke was waiting on the porch, his face white with fury as he saw the police car. He thanked the officer, his voice dripping with false concern. The second the cruiser was out of sight, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep like claws. "What the hell did you think you were doing?" he snarled, pulling me inside. "You want to get us all killed?" The recorder on the mantelpiece captured the undisguised threat in his voice. The last shred of pretense evaporated that night, the night before the dinner. Vanessa came to my room, not with a pill, but with a thick strawberry smoothie. "For a good night's rest, Eleanor," she said, her smile painted on. I took the glass. The smell hit me immediately, not just fruit, but a sharp, acrid, chemical bitterness underneath. It was too strong. This was not a sedative. This was a dose meant to do something. "Thank you, dear," I whispered. I locked my door, walked into the adjoining bathroom, and poured the entire pink, viscous sludge into the pot of my large asparagus fern. When I woke, the leaves of the fern were brown, withered, and scorched. I sent a photo of the dead plant to Nora. My burner phone rang almost immediately. It was Daniel, his voice frantic, choked with fear. "Mum? He's trying to kill you. He's moved on. We're calling this off. I'm calling Nora. I'm calling the police. It's over." "No, Daniel," I said, my voice colder and steadier than I had ever heard it. "It's not. He's desperate. He's sloppy. If we pull back now, we lose everything. This is our only chance to bind him. We proceed with the dinner." I hung up before he could protest. The morning of the party arrived. I was in the kitchen, calmly basting the chicken. Luke and Vanessa were watching me, drinking coffee, their nerves stretched taut. At 10 o'clock, Luke's phone, sitting on the counter, buzzed with a text. He glanced down. He froze. His face drained of all colour. He picked up the phone, his hand visibly shaking. He showed the screen to Vanessa. I knew what it said. It was the text Nora's team had sent from an anonymous number. "Feds are looking into your mum's accounts." He looked at me, this frail old woman humming as she prepared a meal. He looked at Vanessa, his eyes wide with animal panic. He thought he had a mole. He thought the walls were closing in, that the federal government was already at the door. He made the only move a cornered rat could. He looked at the briefcase by the door, the one containing the house deeds. He would not wait for the court. "Mum," he said, his voice a strange, flat calm that was more terrifying than his rage. "Change of plans. We're going to sign those papers today, during the party, right here, in front of all your friends, so they can all be witnesses to how much you want this." The late afternoon sun streamed into the dining room, cutting golden shafts across the table. It was the same table we had eaten at for 30 years. I had made his favourite meal, roast chicken, potato salad, green beans from the garden I used to keep. Luke and Vanessa were masters of false cheer, laughing too loudly as they greeted our guests. The guests. There was my neighbour, Marjorie, a sweet, unsuspecting woman who had brought a jello mould. There was a Mr. and Mrs. Clark, a quiet couple I introduced as old friends from my court days. In reality, it was Nora Camden, looking severe and elegant, and a senior federal investigator, who looked like a bored husband. And finally, there was Graham Porter, introduced as an old colleague of Daniel's, his face a mask of quiet sympathy. I played my part. I was the dotty, grieving widow. I asked Marjorie twice how her hydrangeas were. I called Graham Mr. Peterson. I watched Luke out of the corner of my eye. He was not eating. He was checking his watch, his hand repeatedly straying to the briefcase resting by his chair. He was a trapped animal, and he was ready to bite. In the middle of dessert, Luke stood up. He clinked his glass with a spoon, the sound jarringly loud. "If I could have everyone's attention," he said, his voice thick with a fake, sonorous emotion. I want to thank you all for being here. It means so much to Mom." He smiled at me, a horrible, loving smile. "As you all know, Mom's been struggling, and she's asked me and Vanessa to step in, to help her manage things, to make sure she's cared for." Vanessa dutifully produced a tissue and dabbed at a perfectly dry eye. "We just love you so much, Eleanor," she whispered. Luke reached down and lifted the briefcase onto the table, placing it next to the potato salad. He clicked it open and pulled out a thick sheaf of papers. "We just have some formalities to get out of the way. Paperwork my lawyer drafted up. just to make sure all of Mum's wishes are respected. He fanned them out the deed of transfer for my house, the durable power of attorney, the final petition for guardianship. "It's all very simple," he said, directing his words to the guests, to his witnesses. "This just puts me in charge of the bills. This just moves the house into my name, to protect it. It's just a formality." He pulled the pen from his pocket, an expensive pen, one I'm sure I paid for. "Mum." I let my hands tremble. I looked at the papers, my face a mask of confusion. "Oh, Luke, it's so many words. If I sign, whose name does the house go in? I don't understand." He was getting impatient. I could see the muscle jump in his jaw. "Mom, we talked about this. It's just for safekeeping. It just temporarily goes into my name, and Vanessa's." Nora and her husband exchanged a single, imperceptible glance. They had it. "Okay, Luke," I whispered. "If you say so." He slid the papers in front of me, his finger jabbing at the signature line. This was it. This was his victory. I picked up the pen. Then I looked up, past him, at all the guests, my voice suddenly sharp and clear, cutting through the room's feigned sympathy. "And the $500,000 from Daniel's life insurance policy. Luke, have you used that to pay your debts yet?" You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. The only sound was the sharp tink as Vanessa's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. Luke froze, his hand still on the table. His face went from flushed to a waxy, pale white. "What? What did you say?" I reached into the pocket of my house dress. I pulled out the copy of the policy Daniel had found. I threw it on the table. It slid across the wood and stopped at his hand. "I said," I repeated, my voice now loud. "Were you going to kill your brother on paper and then kill me for real?" "That's enough," the investigator said. He stood up, pushing his chair back. He reached into his coat and pulled out a badge. "Federal investigator. Everyone in this room, sit down. Do not move." Nora stood as well, her eyes fixed on Luke. "Luke Marsh, you are under investigation for fraud, conspiracy, and wire fraud. Every conversation in this house, every document, every video from Dr. Carver's office. It has all been recorded under federal warrant." Luke's face crumpled. He looked from me to Nora to the badge. The trap was sprung. He did the only thing he could think to do. He shoved the table, sending plates crashing, and bolted. He ran for the front door, for the hallway. He rounded the corner at a full sprint and ran straight into a solid body. He stumbled back, landing hard on the floor. Standing in the hallway, blocking the only exit, was Daniel. Alive. His face was like stone. Luke stared up from the floor, his face slack with a kind of terror that went beyond fear of the law. He looked like he had seen a true ghost. He scrambled backward, crab walking away from Daniel, his eyes wide and unblinking. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "No, you can't be. I saw. I paid for." He stopped, his gaze darting to the federal investigator, realizing what he was admitting. I. What is this?" Vanessa shrieked, finding her voice. It was high and hysterical. "This is a trick. This is insane. We were just trying to help her. She's sick. She's confused. Look at what you're doing to her." "Is that what you were doing at Dr. Carver's office, Mrs. Marsh?" Graham Porter said, his voice cutting through her hysteria. He stepped forward, opening a laptop he'd retrieved from his bag. He turned the screen so everyone, including Marjorie, who was frozen in her chair, could see. He clicked. We all watched the video from the pen. We saw the hallway. We heard Luke's voice, clear as day. "Is it enough? Is that what you need?" And Carver's reply, "The report will be definitive. She won't be able to sign a check for her own groceries." Then, the unmistakable sound of an envelope being passed. "A team apprehended Dr. Carver at his clinic 30 minutes ago," the investigator said, his voice flat. "He is currently being questioned, and Mrs. Marsh. He is singing. He's already detailed the entire payment schedule you arranged. Mr. Marsh, the one you paid for with your mother's own money." That was the blow that broke Vanessa. The doctor had been her insurance, her proof of their good intentions. She crumpled, not a sound coming from her mouth, her face a mask of utter ruin. Daniel took a step forward, then another, until he was standing over his brother. Luke was still on the floor, a broken man in a ruined dining room. "You opened credit cards in her name," Daniel said, his voice low, shaking with a contained, cold fury. "You forged her signature on loan applications. You calculated the equity in her home, this home, and you used it as collateral. You offered it to the animals you borrowed from. You put a price on her head to save your own." Each sentence was a hammer blow. "You stood at my funeral, and you watched her grieve. You watched her break." It was too much. Luke's panic found an outlet. In one desperate, fluid motion, he scrambled to his feet, lunged for the sideboard where I kept the carving set, and grabbed the long, sharp knife. The room held its breath. Marjorie let out a small, terrified squeak. The investigator's hand went to his coat. But Luke did not turn on us. He turned the knife on himself, pressing the tip hard against the skin of his own throat. "No get back," he screamed, tears of pure, desperate rage streaming down his face. "It's all gone. Everything. If I've lost everything, what's the point? What am I supposed to do?" I did not scream. I did not plead. I took a single step toward my son, my youngest child. I looked him dead in the eye, and my voice was as cold and sharp as the blade he was holding. "Hurting yourself won't erase the evidence. Luke, it won't pay your debts. It just proves what I already know. You are a coward, from beginning to end. You weren't even brave enough to be a good murderer." My words hit him harder than a slap. The fire went out of his eyes, replaced by a vast, empty shock. His hand trembled. The knife wavered. That was all the investigator needed. In 2 strides, he was on Luke, grabbing his wrist, twisting it with brutal efficiency. The knife clattered to the floor. The investigator spun Luke around, slamming him against the wall, and the sound of handcuffs ratcheting closed filled the silence. "Vanessa Marsh," the investigator said, not even looking at her. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and suspicion of attempted poisoning." She was pulled from her chair and cuffed. They were led out, past the half-eaten chicken, past the shattered glass. As Luke was pulled through the doorway, he twisted, his face no longer angry, just hollowed out, empty. He looked at me, and his voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, when did you know?" I met his gaze, and I gave him no comfort. I gave him the truth. The day I buried a stranger, Luke. The day I realized my living son wasn't brave enough to die for anyone but himself. The front door slammed shut. The sound of sirens, distant at first, grew closer, then faded away. The house, my house, was suddenly terribly silent. There was just me, Daniel, Graham, and Nora standing in the wreckage of the dinner party, each of us facing a different kind of emptiness. The weeks that followed were a quiet, methodical unraveling, helix quant, working with the federal task force, used the tendrils of data Daniel had found and the evidence I had collected to pull apart Luke's entire financial life. His company, Frontline Renovations, was a hollow shell, a simple pipeline for a much larger money laundering operation. My recordings, combined with Luke's panicked phone records, led to a string of arrests, acquaintances from construction sites, silent partners from backroom casinos, the men he owed money to. The trial was almost comically swift. Luke and Vanessa's defense attorneys barely had a leg to stand on. The evidence was absolute: the video from Carver's office, the audio recordings from my mantelpiece, the forged bank statements, the emails, and the damning, complete testimony of Dr. Carver himself, who had turned state's witness to save his own skin. Luke's lawyer tried to paint a picture of a desperate son, crushed by debt, who just wanted to protect his family's assets. But the prosecution simply played the audio of Luke laughing with Vanessa about moving Mom into the cheapest place we can find. I was called to the stand. I did not look at Luke, not even once. I looked at the jury. I told them, in a clear, steady voice, about the pills. I told them about the fog I had lived in, and the chilling clarity when I finally spat the pill into the handkerchief. I told them about the small, daily manipulations of my memory, the way they made me doubt my own mind. I told them about signing papers I could not read, because the man who gave them to me was my child. I ended with the truth. My son didn't want me dead, I said. The courtroom silent. He wanted me to live, long enough to sign everything. Then, Daniel testified. He described the agonizing process of his death, of watching my grief from a distance, of seeing me collapse by a stranger's grave, unable to run to me, unable to hold me. He described the helplessness and rage of knowing his own brother had put him in that position. He looked directly at Luke when he spoke. That was the only time, I am told, that Luke cried. The verdict was inevitable. Luke received a long sentence for multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Vanessa received a lighter, but still significant, sentence. Dr. Carver, as part of his plea, surrendered his medical license permanently and would face his own sentencing for his role. After the dust settled, Nora and I finalized the plan. My beautiful 3-story home, the one filled with so many ghosts, was sold. As per the new will, the entire estate was liquidated and moved into the trust fund Nora had established. It would now fund legal scholarships, indefinitely. I kept nothing but a small stipend, enough to live simply Daniel, wanting a fresh start from the high-stakes world that had almost consumed him. Resigned from Helix Quant and took a quiet consulting job with a small firm, a job that let him sleep at night. A few days before Luke was scheduled to be transferred to a long-term facility upstate, I went to see him. The visiting room was grey and smelled of disinfectant. He sat behind the glass, looking thinner, but also strangely calmer. The panic was gone. He picked up the receiver. "So," he said, his voice flat. "Are you here to lecture me, Mum? Give me one last sermon on morality." "No, Luke," I said. my voice just as calm. I am here to tell you that you lost, and not just to the law. You lost to the better version of yourself, the one I used to believe existed, the son I used to know. He tried. Even then. He blamed the economy. He blamed the loan sharks. He blamed the system that forced him into debt. He blamed Daniel for being the favorite, for having it easy. I listened, impassive, letting him spin his web of excuses. When he was finally done, breathless and angry, I leaned forward. You can sit in here and pity yourself for however many years they gave you. Luke, that is your choice. My part, the only part I have left, is to go on living well. I paused, then delivered the final cut. Without you. I stood up and hung up the phone. Daniel was waiting for me in the parking lot, his face anxious. He opened the car door for me, his hand on my shoulder. Are you okay? Mum. I took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. I didn't go there to forgive him. Daniel? I said, looking not at the prison, but at the open road ahead. I went there to close the door. I settled into my seat. It's time for the last part, the part where I stopped letting him have one more minute of my life. 1 year later, to the day, the anniversary of the funeral that never was, Daniel and I were in a new place, a small, modest apartment in a coastal town where the wind off the water smelled like salt, not pine. No one knew our last name. The walls were mostly bare. I had kept only one photograph for the mantelpiece, a snapshot of me and Daniel, squinting against the sun on a beach, taken just a few weeks prior. There were no photos of Luke. Nora forwarded me a letter. It was from Luke's new, court-appointed lawyer. He was petitioning to have me name him as the beneficiary of a small retirement account I had forgotten I even had. My client hopes to use these funds, the lawyer wrote in dry, formal language, to build a new life upon his release and make a fresh start. I read the letter twice. A fresh start. He wanted me to give him a fresh start. I put the letter aside. I sat down at my small desk, took out a single sheet of plain white paper, and I wrote my last letter to Luke. I did not cry. I did not rage or curse him. I simply wrote the facts. I listed the money he had stolen. I listed the lies he had told. I listed the name of the doctor he had bribed and the chemical he had put in my tea. I wrote down every chance I had given him to stop, to come clean, and to be a son. And I ended the letter with one final sentence. You do not need me to start over. Luke, you need you. I folded the letter. Then, I printed one more page, the single clause from the trust, the one Nora had drafted. I took a highlighter and I drew a neat, bright yellow line over the words, to my son, Luke Marsh. I leave the sum of $1 symbolic. I put them both in an envelope and sent them. This was my true revenge, not the jail cell, not the loss of the money. It was letting him live, sober and clear-headed, for the next 20 years, in a small concrete room, with nothing to do but read that piece of paper and understand, finally and completely, the full and total scope of what he had thrown away. The next day, I went to the bank. I stood in front of a very polite young teller, and I formally closed that last, forgotten retirement account, the one Luke had been asking for. The balance was small, just a few $1,000s. I'd like to close this and have the balance transferred, I said. The teller nodded. And where will the funds be going? Mrs. Marsh. I smiled. To the Legal Aid Scholarship Fund, I said. I no longer have a son who needs money. I only have children who need the law to protect them. That night, Daniel and I walked along the shore. He was quiet for a long time. "You know, Mum," he said, his voice low. "A part of me kept hoping you would. Forgive him." At the end, I stopped, looking out at the black, endless water. "Oh, Daniel," I said, "this isn't about forgiveness. This is about justice. The courts have their justice, and a mother has hers. His justice is to be forgotten. My justice is to remember." He looked at me, really looked at me, and I could see the question in his eyes. "When did you first really suspect?" I thought back. Before the pills, before the bank statements. It was something he said. I replied. "About 6 months before it all. We were in the kitchen, and he was complaining about his business. He just said, very casually, 'Well, this will all be easier when you're not here anymore.' He said it like it was a fact, like he was talking about the weather. 'That,' I said, pointing to my heart, 'is when I knew. You just confirmed it.'" Daniel was quiet, processing. He realized that I had not been a victim he needed to save. I had been a soldier waiting for her weapons. "If I had been weaker, Daniel," I admitted, starting to walk again, "I probably would have let him lead me right into that hole he dug. I would have believed his pills. I would have signed his papers. My survival. My being right here. Right now. Breathing this air. That is the most beautiful revenge on anyone who thought I was just some easy, forgetful old woman." I reached the end of the boardwalk. I stood for a moment, then turned my back to the dark water. Daniel put his arm around my shoulders. We walked back toward the lights of our new home. I did not look back. I did not say his name. I did not promise to visit. I did not promise to write. My silence, my complete and total absence from the rest of his life, that was the final sentence. It was the heaviest sentence of all for a man who believed he held my entire world in his hands, only to find himself left with nothing at all. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from today. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. If you'd like to support my channel, Grandma's Family Diary, please subscribe, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story.